Chapter 23, verses 101 through 181. 101. Be clearly conscious, even if you vehemently deny it and believe that you are not guilty, that every single one of you is responsible for each war and each act of terror, and for each other act of Gewalt. Indeed, even if you do not advocate it, and you are guilty of it because you do not do anything against it and you do not oppose it in any reasonable and logical wise in Gewalt samer Gewaltlosigkeit. You are only innocent of the whole thing if you do whatever is possible for you to take measures against all the terrible things, the wars, the terror, and the acts of Gewalt, whether through spoken words, through speeches and lectures, or through the script. Because if you do this, then do it according to law, and right within the frame of the creational laws and recommendations to which each war and other terror and all acts of Gewalt stand in contradiction. 102. Human beings of Earth, you are full of aggressivity and are not connected to humankind, but rather you are nationalistic and racialistic as well as full of selfishness, full of conceit, ideals and prejudices, and you have your titles and your riches, as well as your gods and tin gods and human idols and your belief in them. Therefore you adore them, worship them, and make entreaties to them. And all this separates you from one another. 103. Truly you must clearly recognize, and indeed through intellect and rationality, that you are yourselves responsible for all the terrible things surrounding you and for the entire chaos in you and in your world, for all the affliction and for all the misery in yourselves as well as in the entire world. And you yourselves contribute to making everything even worse because you do not restrict your offspring, but rather continue to reproduce irresponsibly, through which all terrible things, the misery and the affliction as well as the gigantic catastrophes also continue to multiply in the world and in its nature, as do also the hatred, the jealousy, the wars, the terror, the acts of Gewalt, and crimes, etc. amongst you. 104. Finally recognize, you human beings of Earth, that you yourselves have contributed to all the terrible things of your world through your daily life, and are contributing further because you are, as part of the monstrous earthly society, complicit in and responsible for everything, for the human dignitylessnesses, for the hatred, for the jealousy, for the death penalty, for the wars, acts of terror, and crimes of all kinds, for all the misery and affliction, for all the brutality, acts of Gewalt and ugliness, for the greed, vices, and pathological cravings, debauchery, and all other Ausartungen. Only when you finally recognize this fact and look round for the real truth of all truth, and find it in the creational laws and recommendations, and follow it, only then will you finally act rightly and do everything for the best of yourselves and of your world. 105. However, it is not easy for you human beings to do the right thing in order to build up in yourselves, in your inner nature, a completely different individuality which raises you up in the consciousness and shows you things of the life which are of such high values that you never could have dreamed of. And if you create a new individuality in your inner nature, then also let it act outwardly, by means of which a completely different and new world builds up around you, as well as valueful. Interhuman relationships come about, and love, harmony, peace, and freedom amongst all of you. 106. The doing in this wise is a very serious matter, but you will not find out by yourselves what you must do in order to achieve everything, and to direct the whole in a solid, better, and good forms. And precisely out of this reason have human beings arisen amongst you who have worked themselves up to ones having knowledge, wise ones, and to proclaimers, to prophets, by finding out and learning the causes and effects of the nature and of the creational laws and recommendations, in order to teach you about the knowledge one, so that you might recognize the truthfully laws and recommendations of creational form and put them into practice in the life, so that it may go well with you. 107. The true prophets, the proclaimers of the truth, they are your true leaders, you human beings of Earth, because they know and understand the creational laws and recommendations better than you. However, truly, they can only teach and explain these to you, because learning and acquiring them in yourselves through rationality and intellect is something that you alone must do, and in fact out of free will and without the urgings of the prophets. The true prophets, namely, may only teach you, but not urge you to accept their teaching, because this would be the equivalent of a coercion to the belief. And through a coercion to the belief you would learn nothing and not find the truth in yourselves, Rather, you would only become the pattern of a new belief. Without finding the truthly truth of all truth in yourselves and in the creational laws and recommendations. 108. And there have been and still are many so-called spiritual leaders and false prophets in your world, of whom you have assumed and continue to assume that they understand the things of the truth better than you. But truthfully they have said and continue to say this only because they have attempted and also continue to attempt to make you subserviently dependent on them and on their false teaching, and to press you into their false teaching as a pattern. And truly, this has not brought you very far even since time immemorial, and will also in the future not bring you further than that you erroneously pray and make entreaties, as you have up until now, to your gods and tin gods as well as to your human idols, from whom you will however never receive real help. 109. And there have been and still are many worldly wise ones and academics since time immemorial, whose wisdoms regarding spiritual and godly concerns have up to the present day not brought you human beings of earth further, because their spirituality and godliness indeed does not correspond to the truth of the creation and its laws and recommendations, but is only based on inventions and fantasies which have been invented through the worldly wise and academics. 110. The worldly wise and academics, as well as the spiritual leaders and false prophets, have lied to you and alleged that all ways were directed to lead to the truth, irrespective of whether you are believers of a religion or sect, or whether you belong to a philosophy or ideology. But this is complete nonsense, because the only way to the truth leads through the inner of you human beings yourselves, since it is only and exclusively there that you can find the effective truth as is pre-given, through the creation and its laws and recommendations. However, you cannot find the truth through lies and deception, nor through gods and tin gods, nor through religions, sects, philosophies, and ideologies. 111. No way leads to the real truth of all truth, because the truth itself is the way, and thus the way is also the culmination point, namely the truth itself. And it is only out of this reason that the way of the truth is spoken of, which in itself leads to the truth, and it is precisely in this that the vitality of the truth consists. 112. If you look at and consider something lifeless, then a way leads to it which you can follow, because everything that has died makes no movement and remains in a particular place or location, in contrast to the way of the truth which is vital and in movement. 113. However, because the truth is something vital and in continuous movement, it is not bound to one place, and neither is it bound to a restricted religious or other belief, as well as not to a godser tin God's house. 114. Neither a spiritual leader, a religion, a holy man, an ideologue, nor a priest, sect guru, or a teacher can lead you to the continuously moving truth, because the truth is no material place such as a church, synagogue, chapel, mosque, lodge, or temple, etc., because the effective, the truthfully truth is solely in yourselves as well as in the creation and in its laws and recommendations. 115. And because the truth as way and culmination point is vital and is continuously in motion in you yourselves, this means that the truth unstoppably extends and moves further in you. Therefore, you do not remain lying on a particular truth. Rather, it continues to expand more and more through your research, and as a result it grows in you, and you become ever more knowing and wise. This in contrast to the religious belief, which is a firmly defined and non-expandable, unprovable and refutable illusion which is poor both in terminology and argument, and is based on pretenses of false facts. 116. Truly, you human beings of earth, you do not live according to the love of the creation, just as you do not create the true love in yourselves, and therefore you live your own life according to the pre-given of your own scheme, in which anxiety and fear of many things inhere, as however also anger and brutality, Gewaltsamkeit, violence and strife, hatred, jealousy, pathological craving for revenge, pathological craving for retaliation, coarseness, affliction, tribulation and despair, etc. 117. Already when you have recognized and understood this fact, will you comprehend a tiny iota of the real truth in yourselves. But you can only recognize and understand this truth providing you know how to look at these things which belong to your life. And it is the true prophets who teach you human beings this mode of looking through the teaching of the truth, the teaching of the Spirit, the teaching of the life. 118. And truly, you can only look at the truth with the truth itself. Not, however, with anxieties and fear, not with hopes and not with a religious belief, as well as not through a veil of lying words of false teachers and false prophets, and also not with philosophies and ideologies. Because if you want to experience the real truth, then you must not be dependent on anybody or anything, but only bestir yourselves according to your own will and interest in absolutely your own energy and power, and turn to the truth that you can only find in yourselves as well as in the creational laws and recommendations. 119. Therefore, consider that you shall only ever be yourselves, and that there is no teacher, no leader, no guru, no master, no prophet, and also no other authority through which you might find the truth, because only you can do this all alone in yourselves, because truly, in this case, there is only you all alone who must work in yourselves and find the truth. 120. Even the true prophets cannot give you the truth or show you a way to the truth, because for yourselves you alone are capable of fathoming out the truth in yourselves and also finding it and living according to it, because none of you can change another, because the one who must change can only do this from out of himself or herself and on his or her own. 121. And if you recognize this truth, then you shall not fall into despair because of it, since nevertheless you stand in a relationship to your fellow human beings and to the world. Therefore there is no reason for you to let either bitterness or cynicism grow in you. 122. Nevertheless, however, the truth demands that you look the facts in the eye, namely that you are yourselves responsible for all and everything with regard to the thoughts and feelings that you harbor, the actions that you commit, and the deeds that you do. 123. Only you are responsible for the world and for yourselves, for everything that you think up and do, and you must become conscious of this in order to make disappear your self-pity through which you criticize your fellow human beings, insulting them, reproaching them, nagging them, and tormenting them, because through that you believe to be covering up your self-pity. 124. Human beings of earth, you must be yourselves in every wise, and therefore you yourselves must also determine over yourselves, so also over your thoughts, feelings, actions, and your efforts, so that you may not be dependent on anybody and be the true might over yourselves, free from gods and tin gods and their servants who subjugate, enslave, and exploit you. 125. And it is truly the truth that you can, without any outward influence, without authorities and without coercion, as well as without anxiety or fear of punishment, build up in the core of your inner nature a new individuality, a new speciality with a renewal and positive expansion of your character and your personality, providing you consciously revolutionize your old characteristics and bring forth a psychological, developmental change out of your own power. 126. And if you bring forth the developmental change in yourselves, then you will no longer be ones who have got very badly out of the control of the good human nature, no longer full of anxiety, brutality, jealousy, and fear, neither full of greed, vice, and hatred of all kinds, neither full of violence, pathological craving for war, pathological craving for revenge, pathological craving for retaliation, crimes, and quarrelsomeness, nor full of uncalmness, envy, and desires, etc. 127. Truly, all these Ausartungen are not pre-given through the creational laws and recommendations. Therefore, they are also not expression forms of your nature, but rather an evil machination of yourselves, through which you have also built up your worldwide rotten society, in which you inevitably have to live and in which your daily existence takes place. And indeed, for as long as you fail to turn to the real truth, and therefore fail to follow extensively the laws and recommendations of creational form, because everything will only change to the better if you bind yourselves as individuals and as society with the real truth and therefore with the nature, and thus also with the creational laws and recommendations. 128. Understand, human beings of earth, that the teaching of the prophets, the goblet of the truth, the teaching of the truth, the teaching of the Spirit, the teaching of the life, is no ideology and no philosophy, neither is it a religious construction of confusing terms and irrational ideas. Therefore, however, the teaching does not require a belief, nor any praying and entreaties to gods and tin gods, or to human beings who raise themselves up to tin gods. 129. ideologies, philosophies, and religions are belief-conditioned theories which, as exceedingly foolish guidances into the unreal, have nothing to do with the effective truth and with the effects of the creational laws and recommendations. 130. What is important in your life is, without doubt, not false religions, ideologies, and philosophies, but rather that you consciously observe and perceive everything round and about you, and indeed everything that arises day in and day out, and actually in yourselves, everything negative and positive, everything agreeable and disagreeable, as well as everything that happens to your fellow human beings and throughout the entire world. 131. And if you follow this guidance and you observe everything precisely and actually perceive everything and examine what goes on within you and outside you, then you can also understand it rationally and intellectually. 132. Rationality and intellect, however, do not fully encompass everything that your existence presents to you. Rather, they are only small parts of the whole, and you must put these together in order to finally have a oneness, a whole. 133. All things, therefore, which you comprehend are only small parts of the life, and indeed irrespective of how discerningly, venerably, and traditionally these things of life may be put together as individual values or unvalues. It is you yourselves, however, who must put everything together into a whole, because it is only through this that you can reach the highest level of your understanding and your evolution, if you concern yourselves with the whole. 134. It is only when you recognize what is going on in yourselves as well as in your fellow human beings and in the entire world in detail that you can start to understand that the inner and outer process is fundamentally an equal one. 135. The inner and outer process of development represents an all-embracing movement, where the movement of your inner is reflected in the outer, and the outer is reflected in your inner. 136. And truly, you human beings of Earth, you only need to consciously make yourselves capable of looking at everything just as amply and consciously and perceiving it just as consciously, because that and how you look is the fundamental necessity to which you must give your attention. 137. Consider, if you know how you have to look at the things of the life and perceive them, then everything will become entirely clear and precise for you, and you will recognize that all that is required in order to look at and to perceive is merely your own motivation and merely your own will, as well as your own initiative. However, no ideology, no religion, and no philosophy, as well as no teacher, priest, no gods and 10 gods, and of course no human idols and neither false nor true prophets. Because only you alone through yourselves can determine over yourselves and over what you want to do or not do. 138. Truly, no one can say to you how you need to look and to perceive. Therefore the true prophets do not say to you either how you shall look and perceive, but only that you shall look and perceive, because you are, as an individuum, as a human being, each of your own individuality, through which you alone can determine how, when and where you want to look at something and also how you want to perceive it. 139. And if you strive to look at and perceive all things as they are in reality, and indeed both in yourselves and also in the world around you, amongst your fellow human beings and throughout the entire world, then you can really see what corresponds to the reality and therefore also to the truth. But truly, this alone is not enough for you to be able to change yourselves effortlessly and spontaneously in your inner nature, in your individuality, and that is the actual problem, because it is also necessary for a complete change to take place in your inner nature. 140. Many amongst you do not wish to change themselves in their inner nature, and a change of the inner nature is particularly unattractive to those amongst you who are well provided for and secure to a certain extent in economic and social respects, and therefore who only have minor problems, if indeed any at all. But there are also those amongst you who are captured by and dependent on your religion, and who hold fast to your religious, ideological, or philosophical imaginations, or who are ready simply to accept all things of the existence in your own self, and to live with them just as they happen to be or happen to impinge upon you in any quite distinct or altered kind and wise whatsoever. 141. However, all this is wrong, and it is a life attitude that does not correspond with the truth and reality, and indeed not with the guidelines of the creational laws and recommendations either, which are not difficult to recognize and to fulfill, Indeed, even if they do appear to be too heavy and too power-destroying for you to recognize and to fulfill, because you are too weak towards yourselves and, what is more, too cowardly to separate yourselves from the false of your individuality, which gives you so much apparent joy and apparent well-being if you live according to your Ausartungen, your vices and pathological cravings, your hatred, your unfreedom, disharmony, and the unpeace, as well as your pathological craving for revenge, and all other terrible things. 142. In all this doing and acting with regard to your Ausartungen, you human beings of earth are blocked off towards the truth, because of which you also do not search for the truth, and also cannot fathom it out. Therefore it is pointless and nonsensical for you to complain about all the Ausartungen of the society, which are fundamentally given in yourselves and bring forth malicious effects which lead to further misforming of your inner nature, as a result of which you sink in yourselves and in the society ever more deeply into a negation of the truth, and into new Ausartungen time and time again. 143. Truly, many amongst you create illusions for themselves and assume that they must undertake a fundamental developmental change in their inner nature, however with the aspect that they need to be helped with bringing about the developmental change, and that they must be shown the way thereto. But truthfully, such a way cannot be shown, because each process in yourselves for the developmental change of your own inner nature, of the individuality and attitudes, etc., is purely individual or personal and can only be fulfilled by those human beings amongst you who work on it themselves. 144. And those of you who search for help in order to be shown a way in the form of a method or a system for the developmental change of your own inner nature, those are not really seriously working on an effective developmental change, because everything is merely directed towards having others do everything in order to bring about the apparently desired developmental change. Whereas there is no fundamental interest in a developmental change of the inner nature, but only an interest in having others use a method or a system which is intended to lead to the apparently wished-for developmental change of your own individuality with only minor help from yourselves. 145. But truly, each way, each method, or each system for the developmental change of the inner nature is purely individual, i.e. personal, and cannot be transferred to another by you. Therefore, it would be exceedingly foolish to name a way, a method, or a system. If this, however, were to be done, then you would only be following an imitation, i.e. a pattern, and thereby taking over the purely individual way, i.e. the method or the system of another, and copying the entire thing into yourselves, through which you would unavoidably get yourselves into difficulties and hardships that are based in the thoughts, feelings, consciousness, and psyche, namely through an adapting to an external individuality and through an approval of the same, which without doubt brings forth confusion in your own mental block and leads to chaos in the psyche and consciousness. 146. This means if you do such a thing, that you set up the authority of one of your fellow human beings in yourselves, through which enormous conflicts are brought forth between yourselves and the external authority, as a result of which you believe that you are obliged to do this or that which is told and dictated to you, although you are incapable of actually doing it, because you cannot exchange your inner nature with that of one of your fellow human beings, but must be yourselves and free in yourselves in every wise. Therefore, two inner natures cannot be existent in you either. 147. You human beings of earth, you are individual natures who have your own thoughts and feelings, and well as your own, and therefore individual intentions and inclinations, hardships and needs, as well as wishes, which can in no kind and wise be integrated in an external method or an external system which you believe you must follow. 148. In all respects, an external authority stands in opposition to your own person and dignity. Therefore, the recognition of an external authority in yourselves is a contradiction to your own inner freedom and cannot be tolerated under any circumstances. 149. If you tolerate it nevertheless, then you are no longer yourselves, but rather you lead an existence of doubtfulness, and therefore a life between the external method, i.e. the external system, i.e. an external ideology, and the effective reality of your true life. 150. If you allow to let yourselves in for an attempt in such a wise that brings your own inner nature into consonance with the external authority, i.e. the external ideology, then you demolish your own self-consciousness and suppress your entirely own individuality. 151. The actual truth of yourself is not anchored in the external authority, i.e. ideology, but solely and alone in you yourselves, and indeed in that which you effectively are. 152. Therefore, you shall consider that if you fathom out yourselves, you do not direct yourselves according to others, not according to an external authority, not according to an external ideology, but only according to yourselves and according to what you truthfully are and in all honesty want to be and also strive to be. However, if you do not follow this guidance, then you will remain during the time of your life as human beings who live from the authority of others and are subserviently dependent on them in debasing submissiveness. 153. If you wish to change yourselves, human beings of earth, and if in doing so you demand that you shall be told how you shall do this, then it may very well appear upright that you really want to do it, but that does not correspond to the truth, because truthfully you are being unhonest and do not want it, since you are calling for an external authority which is supposed to help you to achieve a new inner regulation of your inner nature. Therefore, you are hoping to attain a new individuality through it and through its method, i.e. its system, but this is truly not possible because only you yourselves can change yourselves fundamentally through your own motivation, initiative, and power. Therefore, you must also go your own way. 154. An external authority is never able to change your inner nature, your individuality, and create a new inner regulation in yourselves, but truly only yourselves. If, however, an external attempt is made nevertheless to impose a new regulation of your inner nature, i.e. your individuality, then an enormous chaos will inevitably arise in you, through which you are cast into dependency and confusion. 155. This fact, you human beings of earth, is something to which you must respond with intellect and rationality, and recognize it as effective truth, so that you may understand that for your consciousness and for your inner nature, no other authority than your own comes into consideration. 156. If you read and follow a book or other scripts, if you listen to a teacher, to your friends, parents, brothers and sisters, acquaintances, to the other partner in your partnership, whether man or woman, or to an authority or to the society, etc., then this is already an outward and external authority by which you will be captured and made dependent if you do not autonomously think through in yourselves what you have read and heard, and if you cannot in yourselves develop it into a valueful factor of the truth that is independent from the outside. But if you do not do this, then you will continue to live only according to a pattern and a pre-given formula, as you have done since time immemorial, through enslaving yourselves to an external authority and ideology. 157. But if you really want to change yourselves in your consciousness and in your inner nature, and therefore also acquire a new and sound individuality for yourselves thereby, then you must ask yourselves how you can change to the good and better, and how you can create in yourselves a new authority that is your own, by means of which you then put an end for all time to any external as well as your own old authority, so that you are then only yourselves. 158. In order to achieve this, however, you must change yourselves down to the roots of your inner nature and existence, as well as in your consciousness, which you must direct in its function into the right lines of right thoughts, out of which right and good feelings arise accordingly, through which you not only form your own psyche, but also influence your inner nature towards a new individuality in a good wise. 159. And if you act in this wise, then you will no longer be dependent on any external tradition through which an enormous dependency, indolence, and subservience is imposed upon you, which has ruled you since time immemorial. 160. Therefore, always consider that you can never expect any help whatsoever from outside with regard to your inner developmental change, but that you can in every wise only help yourselves. What can be given to you from the outside through external authorities is no more and no less than a direction or teaching of what you actually have to do, that you simply must change yourselves to the better. However, the way, the method, or the system is something that you must find in yourselves, because this is a purely individual and therefore personal concern, since truly each human being is an individuum of their own, which has their own individual ways, methods, and systems in order to deal with both themselves and with the world around. 161. Therefore there is no God, no tin God, no teacher, no dogma, no method, and no system, no coercion, no cleric, no false or true prophet, and also no other human being or other external influence through which you could be shown an individual way to an inner developmental change in your inner nature and consciousness, because this individuality is only given in yourselves. 162. If you only want, you can reject any external authority and only accept your own, and therefore truly only be yourselves, through which it arises that you no longer let yourselves be enmeshed in ideologies, philosophies, and religions, and also that you no longer go in fear of gods, tin gods, or demons, nor any of your fellow human beings, because if you finally recognize your own value, then you will not let yourselves be led any longer either through subservience, i.e., through submissiveness, or treated as a second-class human being and even bullied, but rather you place yourselves in your value on the same level with your fellow human beings, without however raising yourselves up over them. 163. And when you are finally yourselves, then it will happen that you repudiate everything false that you as human beings have dragged around with yourselves for many generations. And truly, when this happens, then an ever greater energy will grow in you, out of which more and more power will unfold, through which you will come to ever more, greater and more extensive life capability, as well as to greater vital courage, which has inherent in itself very much more intensity, drive, and vitality than can be entirely lived out. Therefore, large reserves are always available, which can no longer run out. 164. And once you have achieved this and brought it to ample effect in yourselves, then you have liberated yourselves from the heaviest burden of your life, and have cast off from yourselves everything connected with external authorities, as well as the heavy weight of your own old and unworthy authority, which is now replaced through a new, powerful, and energy-rich one. 165. Truly, the very realization of a great developmental change to the good and better is already in you, if you become conscious that you have cast off everything that is old, valueless, and unsuitable, and through that have won very much more energy and power, by means of which there is no longer any fear in you whatsoever of committing errors, which you inevitably must commit, since it is only out of these that you can learn. 166. The very fact alone that you no longer have any fear of acting rightly or wrongly creates a lot of energy and power in you, and this alone already represents a developmental change in you. 167. Truly, you human beings of Earth, you require a huge amount of energy and power in order to lead your lives, but you waste a very great part of this power and energy through your anxieties and through your fear. However, if you turn to the real truth, and through this dissipate your anxieties and fear as well as all the terrible things in yourselves consciously through intellect and rationality, then you will create new energy and power through this, which independently brings forth a radical inner upheaval and actual developmental change. 168. However, always be conscious that you are left up to yourselves in all these things and endeavors of the inner developmental change, because if you are serious about your inner developmental change as well as all the things that are connected with it, then truly in this process of the serious inner developmental change, the status is given that you are actually alone with yourselves as human beings. 169. In the process of your inner developmental change, you cannot expect help from any god or tin god or from any human being or from anything else, because apart from yourselves there is nothing that could carry out your inner change. 170. If, however, you consciously carry out your inner developmental change through your energy and power, then you will no longer expect help from outside, from anyone, from any god, tin god, angel, saint, or demon, or from the deceased. Because in the conscious developmental change that you bring about in yourselves, you are already free in yourselves and are able to see what your developmental change brings you in terms of that which is good, better, and positive. 171. And consider, when you are free in yourselves, that there is also great energy and power in you besides the fact that nothing else can be done wrong with regard to the developmental change of the inner nature. And once there is freedom in you, then this has nothing to do with a defense, but rather with you being able to act rightly and freely henceforth according to your own discretion, precisely because you are free in yourselves and act out of the center of your changed inner nature. And therefore you no longer have any anxiety and fear, but are henceforth capable of creating true love in yourselves and also living it out in yourselves to your fellow human beings. Because when you have true love in you, then you can do in the right and the good what you want. 172. And if you have created true love in yourselves, then out of this the process arises that you get to know yourselves and that you go in self-cognition in yourselves, which however in turn only happens through yourselves, but not through psychologists or psychiatrists and not either through any other analysts, through philosophers or those who arrogantly assume that they can be of assistance to you in the self-cognition, although they are not capable of this. Therefore, you truthfully do not learn anything through them, and you cannot learn anything about yourself, but basically only about the one who wants to be helpful to you in the self-cognition. 173. Truly, what your fellow human beings, such as psychologists and philosophers, etc., can teach you is not what you are in yourselves, in your inner nature, i.e. in your individuality. Rather, they can only teach you your characteristics, your peculiarities that proceed out of your inner nature, but not, however, the individuality, the specialness and uniqueness which go very far beyond the characteristics and are connected to the innermost part of the inner nature, which is of pure spiritual nature and belongs to the realm of the spirit form, in which the true love and the life are guided from out of the creational laws and recommendations. 174. Therefore, self-cognition is not the same as self-cognition, and individuality is not the same as individuality, because truthfully both things must be separated in themselves. Indeed, on the one side in the material realm which is outwardly expressed in you human beings, and that realm which only acts in the inner. So therefore it is necessary to speak of a material and outwardly directed self-cognition and individuality, and on the other side of an inner one which really only acts through the power of the spirit form in the inner of the nature, and must be laboriously fathomed out in order to let it have an effect in the exterior, material self-cognition and individuality, fragment by fragment, gradually over the course of the life, as a result of which your being human in the real and true sense evolves over time. 175. It is only through inner self-cognition, which must be fathomed in the core of your inner nature, that you experience and learn what you actually are in the inner of your own self, which is connected with the spirit realm, whereas that which is around the core corresponds to that part of the inner nature which is lived as individuality towards the outside and reflects the material character and the personality, out of which the behavior and the actions and effort are also determined. 176. In the entire process, you must also look at and consider and bring forth a revolution of the consciousness, its thoughts as well as their feelings, and the thereout resulting psyche structure, which may no longer be dependent on an external authority. However, this process involves great difficulties because what is important in the revolutionizing of the consciousness, thoughts, feelings, and the psyche, i.e. the entire mental block is repudiating your own inner and demolished authority in which are anchored all your unimportant perceptions, cognitions, cognizances, your pseudo-knowledge, your practical experiences, and the living of those experiences, as well as all your views, ideas, and ideals. Truly, during your lifetime, you had things, happenings, and experiences that have taught you something, but you have raised up all that which you have learned to a new authority in you by which you are ruled, and which is just as great a destructive effect in you as an authority which is already thousands of years old. 177. Truly, if you want to understand yourselves, both in your innermost spiritual individuality and in your outward, material individuality, then you require neither the authority that you have built up in yourselves during your lifetime, nor that which is thousands of years old, because you are something vital, which is in continuous movement and knows no rest. Therefore, you must not look at yourselves and attempt to fathom yourselves with the dead authority of your up till now life. Rather, you must look at yourselves with the newly created authority, because only through this is it possible for you really to understand everything that lies in the movement and the beauty of the whole. 178. You human beings of earth, you must be free from any external authority and create your own free and good authority in yourselves. Therefore, you must also be free from your own old and inadequate authority, which you have confusingly and erroneously built up in yourselves during your life. You have to make yourselves free and loosen yourselves from everything that was in your past with regard to your false individuality, because only in this wise do you manage that your mental block, your consciousness, your thoughts and feelings as well as your psyche are full of energy and power at all times, are in youthfulness and nevertheless shining in wisdom as well as innocent and full of interest. Truly, it is only in this status that you can be really attentive and heedful, and you can really perceive, observe and recognize everything, and learn thereout. 179. Consider that you human beings of Earth primarily require a conscious and comprehensive consciousness, so that you are capable of directly being aware of your inner and innermost life, process, and can direct it in such a wise that you do not need to correct it continuously, so that you make progress and the whole is what it shall be, but not what it shall not be. 180. If you constantly have to correct your life process, then you are imposing a censor which is nothing other than, again, a new authority which once again dictates new things to you which you follow and through which you are again and again wrongly guided. 181. If you really want to learn, then you must start a long journey in yourselves through your entire nature, through its shell and inner and through its core, and also through your entire mental block and consciousness block, in which case the consciousness, thoughts and feelings are of just as much importance as are the character and personality. And for this journey you must be unweighted, without opinions and prejudices, as well as unburdened through thoughts and feelings and all the rubbish which has built up in you since time immemorial and has burdened you. Forget everything that you yourselves have assumed and thought to know about yourselves, and attempt to recognize yourselves in the wise as if you had never seen yourselves before and never heard anything about yourselves previously, so that you approach yourselves in a totally neutral wise and fathom out what and who you truthfully are.